This happened about 4 years ago. I was 20 years old at the time. The first time I met the guy who had become my grocery store stalker. He was standing outside the store collecting money for the Salvation Army's Christmastime donations. I'm a fairly friendly person, so I like to say hi to people who work at places just to be nice. This guy was a kid around my age, very tall, with a mild resemblance to Work from the Addams Family. Dark circles under dark eyes, short black hair, and a kind of vacant look in his eyes. I chatted with him for maybe about 2 minutes, kind of just idle chit-chat about the weather and whatnot. Nothing particularly memorable or interesting. I then waved goodbye and went home. Little did I know that that single moment would be the start of something that would have me genuinely afraid. About 4 or 5 months passed and I hadn't seen him again. Then one day as I was grocery shopping with a friend, when we were chatting, she suddenly got really quiet and kind of recoiled backwards. Then looking behind me, I turned around to see this guy who had to be at least 6'4" towering over me. He said hi, and he told me that he remembered from that December that I had talked to him, and then asked for my number. I'd been young and had never really experienced this type of interaction before, told him that I didn't have my number memorized, but that I would write his down and then maybe text him later. I kind of halfway waved my phone at him, pointing at my at the time boyfriend whose picture was my wallpaper, making a point to say, "Oh look, that's my boyfriend," to the guy hoping he would clue in but no luck. He told me his number, which immediately upon getting I blocked, without letting him get my number. However, what really made my blood run cold was what he said to me after I put my phone away. He leaned in real close to me and in a really low voice, then told me, "Whatever I text you as for your eyes only." I start to feel genuinely uncomfortable at this point. I said back, Yeah, sure. It was nice talking to you, but we gotta get back to shopping." And I grabbed my friend and dragged her off, shooting a panicked look at her and asking her why she didn't bail me out. Apparently he scared her too, with him getting so close to me, and she just didn't know what to do. I also want to make it clear that I'm not exactly a small girl. I'm 5'8" and solidly built. I can certainly handle myself, and I very rarely ever feel intimidated or small in the presence of anyone, male or female. But this guy, he really made me feel tiny and scared. In the months that would follow, he would make me feel truly frightened. I had really hoped that that creepy interaction would be the last time I saw him, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. After that initial meeting with him, I sang that creepy thing about his text being for my eyes only. It seemed like I would run into him every single time that I got into the store. No matter what checkout I was in, he always seemed to appear at the end of it when I was finished shopping, and every time I was in the store, I would always notice him out of the corner of my eye watching me, no matter what area I was in. One time I even caught him following me out to my car. At that point, I got scared and I finally decided to say something to the managers. After letting all the managers know what was going on, they then assured me that they would tell him not to talk to me. After that, he wouldn't speak to me, but I would continue to see him following me around the store at a distance every single time I went up there. It got so bad and I felt so terrified that I started to be afraid to go to the store at all. But I'm one of those stubborn people who refuses to be intimidated by someone to the point we're gonna stop doing something. I had really hoped that maybe it was just a coincidence that he was following me. After all, it was a really big store and maybe he just had things to do that just happened to be in the same area as I was shopping in, so I started to pay close attention to my surroundings. Once I started really paying attention, I realized that every single time I was up there, I would constantly notice him in the same areas in the store that I was in. During my last encounter with him, I had went to the store to just grab 2 or 3 items that I needed for dinner that night, when I saw him standing at the store with his bag facing me. I quickly ran inside hoping he didn't see me. Unfortunately, a few minutes later, I had Solomon at the very back of the store and items in hand. I immediately made a beeline towards the front. As soon as I got near the checkout, I ducked behind one of the shelf displays and watched carefully at the front of the store to see if the creepy guy would appear. Suddenly I watched him, looking up and down at the checkout, and when he didn't see me there, he stepped outside. At this point, I quickly ran to the nearest open cashier, rang up all my items, and then stuck my head out the door to look for him. I didn't see him there, so I started trying to make my way back to where I was parked. I had parked a little ways away near the side of the store where a bunch of other small stores and restaurants were lined up at. And I was walking towards my car when I realized that I saw him standing by the entrance that I had first entered the store. I quickly dug behind a pillar immediately, hoping he didn't see me. I watched carefully from behind the pillar, and as he scanned the parking lot, he obviously couldn't find me. After a minute or two, he started to walk out towards the direction of the parking lot in front of the store, and so I took that opportunity to make a run for it to my car. As soon as I got into my car, I then locked the doors. In my horror, when I looked up, he was standing near about 15 feet from my car with a shopping cart in front of him. I knew that he followed me and he knew that I knew. I fully believed that he had chased after me, and when I made it to my car, he grabbed the nearest cart to make it look like he was collecting them from the parking lot. I remember just feeling absolutely terrified at that moment. I went home and I immediately told my grandfather what had just happened. I began crying and shaking, and my grandfather told me to get in the car. "We're going to settle this." He and I drove up to the store in his car, and he took me into the store and demanded we spoke with the managers immediately, both of them. When the managers arrived at customer service, he asked me to tell them what had been happening, and demanded that they ensure he left me alone, or that he would involve the police. The managers swore up and down they would take care of it. As far as I know, he wasn't fired immediately because my friend who first encountered him with me when this whole thing began, and told me that she would see him from time to time when she was there by herself, but that any time I went with her, she would never see him. I fully believe that he knew whenever I was there, only this time instead of stalking me, he avoided me. Eventually, everyone who knew the situation stopped seeing him there, so I think he may have gotten fired or moved on from that store. Either way, I haven't had any issues since, but I've never in my life felt so afraid of another human being as I did that day, seeing him make eye contact with me in the parking lot as I locked my car doors. It still really creeps me out to think that he was watching me so closely every time I entered the store, that he could so easily avoid or follow me whenever he wanted. So yeah, I was stalked every time I went grocery shopping for 4 months straight, and I never wanted to experience that ever again. This happened when I was 7 years old with my twin sister. We had just entered our local grocery store Share Fine when a man no more than 10 feet in front of us glanced over and immediately whipped his head back towards us. Now, as a quick side note, my twin and I at that age were always dressed in matching dresses, and we had long blonde hair then had always got us looks of awes and affection. But this was different. He was a bulky, middle-aged man of Mideastern descent, and it stopped what he was doing to fully look at us up and down, with a really husky smile crossed his scruffy face. My mother paid no mind to this as she was no stranger to creepy men herself. I immediately grumbled to my twin Cass how creepy it was the way the man was looking at us. So as we turned left to start going through the aisles, Cass and I turned in and we saw the man walking toward us with his shopping cart. When we first made eye contact, he immediately turned his attention to a table with baked goods on it, which kind of stood out to Cass and I more than if he had just kept walking normally. So my mother's obviously shopping and Cass and I just keep glancing back and we keep catching the man at the end of every aisle that we enter, and even from a slight distance he was seemingly breathing like really weirdly. I also noticed that his cart continues to remain empty except for the baked goods that he grabbed when we had first looked back at him. We tell my mother, but she just rolls her eyes at us and tells us that he probably thinks we're following him because we keep looking at him. The man disappears as we hit the last of the aisles and Cass and I are already on a completely different topic by now when we're heading for the registers, having almost completely forgotten about him within minutes. We're about to make it to the register when my sister asked my mom for a candy bar, and I quickly join, to which she then angrily replies that we don't have the money for it. We're both pouting at this point, and she threatens to leave us as she begins putting things on the conveyor belt. But then Cass and I watched my mother turn to faces again when her expression completely changes and her eyes shift behind us. It's the same man, He's sweating profusely at this point, and he is literally less than like a foot behind us. Cass and I immediately take a step forward towards our mother. The man laughs awkwardly, then apologizes, saying, "Sorry, ma'am, I didn't mean to scare your girls. You're all just so beautiful." "These girls, are they yours?" My mother kind of scoffs at this and then goes, "Yeah, they're mine." And he does that same awkward laugh again, then saying, "I couldn't help but notice that you don't have the money to get them what they want. How old are they? And you as well?" "I could help you. I have lots of money. Money's no problem for me." My mother's face then furrows in confusion and annoyance, then snapping, Excuse me." Like clockwork, he laughs again like it's some big joke, then says, "I'm serious, how much?" My mother stares at him blankly for a moment, and he continues, "How much for the girls? I'd like both of them, but if you could only part with one, I could still make that work. I'll give you the money. Just name your price and I can give them any candy they want." He grins yet again and wipes his brow, looking down at us. My mother doesn't respond to him, just looks at us and growls, "Here, now." So we do as we were told, which was fine by us because we didn't want to be anywhere near this creepy man. The cashier was a teenage girl, no older than 17, and she was just completely wide-eyed watching this conversation occur, as she silently continued to scan our groceries. Once we were next to my mother, she then growled at the man, "If you so much as lay one fucking finger on my kids, I'll break it off and shoving down your throat," which were some pretty big words coming from my 4'11" mother. But the man's face darkens and without even purchasing anything, it walks around the cash register and exits. But he doesn't get far. The entire front of the store is glass. So moments later we watch him press his face against the glass trying to see in, leaving a sweaty face print behind. Now at this point, the cashier's alerting her manager and asking him to call the police. My mother immediately assures them that that's not necessary, and just asks the manager to walk us out into her car. We see no sign of the man as we unload our groceries and hop into the car. My mother quickly drives us home once we sit in the car for a few minutes, scanning for any signs that he might be waiting in a car or something. We eventually made it home safely, and nothing ever came of it. I don't know what happened to the man, but I truly hope he never convinced anyone to give him their kid. That's absolutely horrific to think about. This is a true story about an ex-friend of mine. I had tried to help him through a terrifying obsession he had with a girl. I've always been the type to observe everything from a safe distance. Seldom am I ever brought into drama, but people often come to me for advice. I've given the best and most sound counseling to friends, but this particular guy I knew was beyond any form of help. The guy, we'll call him Andy, made no effort to cover up his psychotic behavior. From mumbling out loud to himself in public, and being physically harmful. Andy was quite the basket case. He also had a twin brother who was quite the opposite. Friendly, charismatic, and very down-to-earth. I knew very little about him at first because I liked to keep to myself. We had gym class together, and when we would walk the track, I had my headphones on most of the time. When a girl began walking around the track with Andy and conversing with him, I instantly noticed because I overheard them talking about some heavy metal bands that I also enjoyed. I'm not really sure how I wound up becoming friends with them, but maybe one of them made a move to hang out with me. Our group consisted of Andy, the Psycho, Krista, Mac, myself, and 2 other girls. We also had our subgroups. Krista and the other 2 girls were really into anime, while Mac and I would get into deep conversations about the mysteries of life. Andy, on the other hand, mostly sat and listened to Krista. He had an obvious crush on her, and by the middle of the school year, everyone, including Krista, knew how desperate he was for her. Krista stated that she didn't date because her father was very protective. Despite her efforts to pull away from him, Andy was practically on top of her, forcing hugs she awkwardly yanked away from, and making it known that he wanted her. On one occasion, she'd blocked his number, realizing that it was a mistake to give it to him in the first place. He managed to steal her phone and unblock his number. After we confronted him about it, he admitted to blocking his twin brother's number in her phone as well. Andy absolutely hated his twin and never wanted to be compared to him, which is understandable because his brother was the charismatic one with lots of friends. Andy said on multiple occasions that he wished his brother was dead, and joked about the joyful thought of killing him. I didn't judge harshly at first, but my friend Mac did. He knew what a creep Andy was. One time, Krista and Andy were talking and he'd taken a seat right beside her. He was telling her not to talk to his brother. Somewhere in the conversation, right in the school library, he slapped her for not listening. I'll never forget the fear and anger on her face, and from then on, even after his awkward apology, Krista let him know he should stay away from her. Unfortunately, he started talking to me more often. Every day on the bus he talked about Krista. Some days he'd even chant her name and get lost in his own thoughts of her. I would try to drop subtle hints that she's not interested, or at the very least to treat her normal and give her space. Apart from his desire for Krista, he was also the most desperate guy I'd ever met. He would ask out every girl he came into contact with. Andy would frequently message me on Facebook telling me that he needed a girlfriend. It's fair to say that he had a knack for making people feel uncomfortable, and some days I couldn't help but ignore him. Krista evaded him until high school graduation, but Andy's obsession only seemed to intensify. I genuinely thought he could be helped and I could get through to him whilst keeping my own distance. But he set off too many alarms. Firstly, he was training for entry into a military boot camp and was discharged for reasons in relation to his mental state. Secondly, every day he would write to me at weird times early in the morning and tell me, "Help, I can't stop thinking of her. I'm in love with her." This was clearly not true because he'd made moves on other girls in the time he'd known her. He had implied that he would self-harm to get her off his mind, but nothing worked. He'd also somehow convinced himself that she wanted him as well and would frequent the grocery store that she went to just to say hi, though she kept her head down and ignored him. One morning, as I was browsing social media, he messaged me the usual, "I need her, I love her, help me, I'm going crazy." I tried to help him analyze his feelings and come to his senses that he was fine and to let her be, hoping to help him put things in perspective. I typed out, "Tell me what you truly love about her." I can't believe what he sent to me next. It was the most ridiculous and degrading message I'd ever read about someone. I won't repeat it verbatim, but it was incredibly graphic and sexual. I felt like I'd read some psycho's personal diary. Truthfully, this girl was tiny, 18 years old and not even 100 pounds, which made me fear he'd prey on her. He was very short, but she appeared vulnerable and smaller than him. I was getting tired of playing therapist for this guy who clearly had no idea he was scaring this girl. Up to the last time we spoke, the worst thing he'd requested of me was to get a hold of Krista's new number. I figured he was going to try to convince her to see him again. He grew frustrated with my decline and pleaded with me to help me obtain her address. Needless to say, the last night we spoke, I wished him well and told him I would not assist him in terrorizing Krista. Then I blocked him. It's been around a year since then. I just hope he got the help he needed, and I hope for her sake that he never found out where she lives.